Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again this week. This week we have Luke Downing, the testing guru, joining us today, and we're going to be covering Teach Steve how to test. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him in. Hey Luke, how
Hello.
you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Really good. So what's this testing I hear about?
Oh, all fun and games. All fun and games. So, high level overview. Um, Testing is a way to very quickly automate checking your application code to make sure it works. Basically, um,
Cool.
a wise developer once said that if you can't prove your code works, then you can't call yourself a professional. Which I agree with. It's important
Yeah,
that we can demonstrate that what we've written actually performs the task we've asked it to, and that we haven't broken anything else in the process, which is which is a mistake I make all the time.
yeah,
So
it
testing is
happens,
like
right?
that safety barrier. Yeah, exactly. We all make mistakes, no matter how experienced we are. So
Definitely.
um,
Cool.
testing can save your bacon, basically.
And I, for one, really like bacon, so that's important.
Oh, there you go.
So, obviously I've done testing before, but no matter how experienced you are with testing or how much testing experience you think you have, you can always learn more, right? There's always new parts to testing you can do. There's always new approaches to testing. So what we're going to do is we've got the CV Builder application, which I have done before. I purposely didn't write barely any tests because I thought I can get Luke to do them for me. Um, so we're going to go back to basics, how to start testing, what we should be looking at testing, and we'll go from there.
Sounds like a plan.
Definitely. Sounds like a great plan to me. So obviously, here is our project. We've got a test directory and we got a few feature tests which I kind of cobbled together. Well, I got one, I think. I've got a couple that I cobbled together just because I wanted to see if it worked. This is all stuff from a package, so I can't take credit for that or blame, depending if it works. I've not really checked. But we're going to
But,
focus mainly on unit tests to start with, right?
yeah, I think. Well, I'm gonna kind of do something called outside in. So
Cool.
we're gonna create a feature test, and that will give us the overarching theme and bang for our buck, and then we
Yep.
can kind of split that down into the unit tests, and we'll discuss the distinction a little bit later on. But yeah,
Sounds perfect. And hey Ali, and hi, Francisco.
Francisco,
Yeah,
the
I'm terrible at
mastermind who
names.
works on Termwind, I do believe.
Yeah.
So hey,
Wow.
Francisco.
Awesome. So where do you want me to start, basically?
Um, Yeah, I mean, let's do a quick overview of test structure, just in case any
Yeah.
people here who have never seen testing before. Specifically with Pest, a lot of the things we're talking about will apply to any testing framework in any programming language, but we're working with Pest. So the first thing you'll notice is in the root of your project you have the tests folder. This is obviously where all our tests live. And when you're using Pest, which is just a composer install away, you also have the pest.php file inside that test directory. So just this one here. And you can see this is fairly simple. You've already kind of, I see, created a few things in here as it is anyway.
Yep.
But basically, this is our configuration file for all of our test suite. And it's super, super important. Um, Usually you don't have to do much to it, but we're going to be coming back here every now and then to change a few things and add a few superpowers to Pest. But this is kind of the baseline configuration file for any Pest test suite.
Cool.
And you can see basically in this case, we have this little users function, and we can basically say that any test that is found inside this feature directory, you can see the feature directory just here, any test in that feature directory should extend this test case class. And this test case class is this one here. A very simple test case class, and it's actually extending the Laravel test case. So one of the nice things about Laravel is it ships with a ton of testing helpers that help you very quickly make tests for Laravel applications. We're going to be using some of those today, but you definitely want to be using their test case when writing feature tests for your Laravel application. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So it's wonderful that, yeah, I don't actually think most of the tests would even be possible without the work that's gone into that test case.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I've tried to use a PHP unit one before, and I was like, I was just missing all of these extra helpers and all of these extra test assertions that I had access to. It's like, what do you mean I can't just do a GET request or I can't assert a database has something? What is this?
Yeah,
You get
absolutely.
very used to those tools after a while.
You do, exactly. And it becomes quite natural after a while that you just reach for specific tooling.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so,
Hey,
sometimes
Matthias
when
from
you,
Italy. Thanks for joining us.
oh, howdy do.
So,
Yeah, sometimes when I was going to say, sometimes when I jump away from Laravel and I'm working and playing PHP, I cry while I'm writing tests occasionally because the tooling is that amazing.
yeah, he's good. He's very good.
Anyhow, if you've got Pest installed and it's working correctly, you can run it from the terminal. So if we can jump over to the terminal, or in fact, I could probably bring it up. Yeah, here we go. So you can run something like vendor bin pest. And if you run that, you'll see the tests all execute and everything's good. If you're using Laravel, you can do PHP artisan test. And you can do -- pest, I do believe. Oh no, never mind. You just need to do PHP artisan test. It's been a while since I've run that. But there you go, and you can see that it will run the tests as well in the terminal. However, if you prefer to do things in your IDE, if you're using PHP Storm, if we could just go back to PHP Storm because I don't have control to switch applications, so sorry about that. But yeah, Pest is fully integrated with PHP Storm through a plugin called the Pest plugin. So once you've installed that, it's completely free of charge. You can basically use all of the things you're used to in PHP Storm for tests. So you can see we can run our tests inside PHP Storm, which makes it super easy to very quickly check particular tests.
And you never have to leave your IDE ever again.
Exactly. And you can set up, obviously, keyboard shortcuts to very, very easily run your test suite or rerun a test you've already executed. Incredibly useful, and you should definitely make use of it if you're using PHP Storm. Okay. So with that out of the way, I thought it would be nice to write a feature test first of all, and to very quickly explain a feature test. A feature test is something that will touch multiple parts of your application. So you could think of this as like testing a user story. In other words, you're going to check that an entire flow from beginning to end works as expected. So we'll do that in just a moment. And what I'm going to do inside this feature directory is I'm going to create a test structure that mimics the test structure or the folder structure of our app. And the actual controller that I'm going to be testing is app http controllers public profile, and it's this show controller here. So you're free to sort of create directories as you see fit. There is no rule to this, but just as my own rule of thumb, I like to follow the exact same folder structure. So I'd have app, I'd have http, and let's jump into directory, and this would be controllers. And if you're more of a terminal or a console kind of person, you can actually also run PHP artisan make :test with the pest option, and you can do it that way instead, which I usually tend to do, to be fair. So we have public, and then we're almost there.
Yeah, I like to add lots of directories and lots of namespaces here.
Well, it just means that when you come back, if the reason I like to match my test structure to my app structure is when I come back, if I want to check very quickly if a class has been tested, takes 2 minutes to go into the test directory and search the tree and see if a test exists.
Yeah.
So in Pest, test files are nothing more than plain PHP files. There's no special file type, there's no special extension. The only thing you need to do is make sure that the file ends in the word test. And this is a very common thing with testing frameworks. So in this case, we're testing the show controller. So we'll call it show controller test. Okay, and you can see it's just an empty PHP file. There's no magic going on. It
The only thing I'm
literally
going to
is
be really picky about is I'm going to have to insist you add that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually something I add to all my files, PHP files anyway. I tend to do it through automated code styling tools.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Strict types for the win. If only there was a way
Definitely.
to set it globally as the default, hey?
Yeah. Definitely wish it was.
It would make life a lot less repetitive, let's put it that way. All right, so pest tests always have the same syntax. It's a very simple syntax. It's been designed to be incredibly quick to jump into. And so all you do is call one of two global functions. You can either call the test function or you can call the it function. Now, I would recommend deciding between one of these and sticking to it for your project, because there's nothing worse than having a mixed bag, and it will obviously cause beginners to question what the difference is. But the only real difference is how you like to write your descriptions of your tests. So in this case, we want to test that the show controller for showing a CV share actually loads correctly. And that's going to give us a lot of bang for our buck. It's going to give us a lot of assurance without actually having to write all that much in the way of tests.
Awesome.
So in this case, why don't we say it loads the public share page correctly? Something as simple as that. And as I say, the syntax, whether you're using it or test, is the exact same. We add a description. The description can be any string you want. You can make it as descriptive as you want. And this is what will load when we actually run the test. So although this test is going to throw a little bit of a fit there, you can see that it actually shows the little description we wrote just there. So the more descriptive you are, the easier it's going to be to understand which tests failed down the line.
The output's just really helpful because it will just take that description and output it back to you. And what I found that, when I was using PHP unit, for example, sometimes you'd be doing, underscores to delimitate the word. Sometimes you'd be capitalizing each word, and it started to make your code look just really ugly. Trying to understand what the test said when you had a really long method name, it just got more difficult.
Absolutely. And here's a really nice thing that I like. So if you take a look at this is what we're actually going to be testing today. And you can see the name that you've given is view::share, right?
Yep.
Let's say we wanted to be super descriptive in this test. And we wanted to say view::share page. Well, that's actually not possible in PHP unit because you're obviously limited to what you're allowed to put as a method name in PHP.
Yep.
And you can't have colons in method names, but in Pest, it's absolutely fine. You can run this, and although it's going to fail because there's nothing in the test, you can see there's no actual problem with us calling or putting a colon in the test itself, and it actually exists there as well, which is really nice.
Yeah, it makes it's time back into your application. It's making your tests part of your app, which what I found with PHP unit is that everything felt slightly disconnected from your application. So using Pest, it feels a natural part of your development lifecycle instead of having to stop and go over here and then write tests and then stop and come back. It feels a lot more joined together, which makes it really nice just to work with. I find myself just writing tests because one, I like writing tests with Pest, but also it's right there and I don't have to switch context. I can just start adding things and using these nice helper methods and it feels familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's no gatekeeping here. If you're a developer that prefers a PHP unit, then that's absolutely fine. The important thing is you find the right test framework for your needs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've used PHP unit for years, And if I'm honest, when Pest first came out, I didn't like it. I was like, I don't get it. Why are we doing this? I'm not writing JavaScript, but then I started using it, and it really just grew on me.
Yeah, absolutely. I can attest to that because I had basically the same experience myself.
Mind you, I had the same response with Laravel when I first started with Laravel. For 3 years, I hated Laravel. I didn't get it. I was like, why is it doing all this stuff for me? I want to do it myself. Um, Silly idea. The better idea is to let the framework do that and then me to do the other stuff. But yeah,
Absolutely. Sometimes it takes time for us to come around to these things.
it does. We can be stubborn.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of good practice while writing tests. I have seen test suites that have become a dumping ground for bad code. And it's kind of like, oh, the application code is gorgeous and we put the time into that, but the tests don't matter and they don't mean anything. So we'll just throw everything in there, and there needs to be no organization or maintainability. And you end up actually causing yourself more bother by doing that. And things become harder and harder to actually change down the line because you don't know whether you should delete a test or whether you need to change a test. So try to keep your tests clean. And one way to do this, one way to make tests very obvious, is to split your tests into 3 distinct steps. And this is called arrange, act, assert. There are other names for it, but I like arrange, act, assert. And basically, the description of this is that we set up the world in our arrange step. All right, we put the Lego pieces together that we're going to use. We separate all the Lego bags and we have them ready in front of us with the instruction manual.
Color coordinated,
Then we actually
high order,
exactly
ready to go.
Exactly. Yep, and you might even start putting the heads on the little Lego men as well. In the act step, we actually start putting together our Lego set, so to speak. We perform an action. In programming terms, we are calling our own APIs in this act step.
Yeah.
And then in our assert step, we're going to check that against the instruction manual. We're going to say, is this what I actually expected it to look like? Has this done what I expected? So that was a bit of an off the cuff illustration there, but hopefully that gets the point across. All right. So how do we arrange this step here? Well, obviously, if we're going to show a share, we need to actually create a share. And Laravel has these awesome things called factories for doing this exact thing. Now, factories allow us to very quickly build up models in a database without having to spend all of the time actually manually constructing those models and putting custom attributes in. So I'll just show you how I would go about setting this up. So let's create a variable that will hold our share model. And as of Laravel 6, I want to say, every model that you create from scratch will have this little factory method. Now, you can access the share factory directly if you don't like this. I know developers who say that this is basically mixing concerns, but I actually think that the syntax is really nice, and I prefer having that little syntax and slight mix of concerns than having to new up a share factory and have something separated when I know it's linked.
Yeah. No, I think I'm with you in that one actually. I mean, it feels familiar. You don't want your test code to interact with the app differently to what your app would. And in your app, in your seeders, for example, you'd be doing it this way.
Exactly.
And if you're using the model itself, you'd be using it this way. So it's got to feel familiar, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, if I actually jump into the share factory for a second, this is the class that is being called under the hood. And you build these yourself. So it's not completely magic. It doesn't do everything for you. But yeah, in your definition, in this definition method, you're basically going to say, here's what I want you to create as the attributes for a share model when I create one through this factory. This is a super powerful paradigm, and it solves so many cases in tests and allows us to very quickly build tests that would otherwise take ages to write. So you can see in this case, we're saying, look, when I ask for a new share model using the share factory, once I've created it, The token attribute of that share model should be a random string of length 20. The email, and you'll see that the factory gives us access to a Faker instance. If you don't know what Faker is, it's basically this PHP library that gives us tons and tons and tons of randomized fake data to use for exactly this kind of thing. You may well have used it for seeding your local database in projects before. So you can see here we say, look, give me a safe email using Faker. I see that Steve's just changed template here, and this is a
sorry.
custom attribute. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. That makes sense. It would have
Yeah.
broken otherwise. But here we're setting the template to this enum, and the enum is casted in the share model, which is why that works. And then the profile ID, we're actually calling on another factory here. This is really clever of Laravel. So Laravel will take this, and if we never override this in our test, it's basically going to create a brand new profile that will link to this share. So factories are very easy to set up complex relations that would otherwise take a long time to write in your tests.
Definitely.
Uh,
It's
go
so nice. So
Yeah,
nice to use as
you
well.
should, without fail, go and look at the documentation for factories because it saves so much time. Anyway, because of how amazing factories are, by doing this, we have a factory at our disposal, and I can actually prove this. Why don't we go ahead and dump and die this share and run our test? And when I do that, you can see here is the share. And if I go down to attributes, here's this random token we created. Here's this safe random email we created. The template is example, and it's created this profile for us as well and set the ID. That's really nice, and it's super easy. Look how easy it was to create a share model with filled out attributes. All right, the next thing we want to do is act, and this is where we're actually going to make a request to our application. Now, there are different ways that you could do this depending on the HTTP method that you're going to use. Now, in our case, the view::share route is a get route. And in Pest, we can actually use this little get method to do this for us. So we say get, and then we pass in using the route helper as you usually would in your application. We pass in the route we want to load. So this is going to be view::share, and we need to pass the route the share object that we've just created. And why don't we assign that to a variable? So let's say response equals get. Okay. Now, if you take a look at the documentation for get, you'll see it actually returns this test response object. And the test response object has tons and tons of helper methods that allow us to make sure in our assert step that we followed the instruction manual, that everything happened as we'd expect. So in our case, I literally want to check that the route loaded okay, right? And that's the simplest test, and it's so easy to do. I can say response assert okay, and this is going to check that the response was a 200, and I think it also checks for a 201. I know it's just 200, isn't it? But basically, we'll just check that the response was a 200 and it wasn't an error. Nothing went wrong. And that already proves a lot to us, right? That proves that the route had no 500 errors, that if it was using blade views, the blade views were loaded correctly, that all of the attributes passed to the blade views were correctly created and passed. There were no errors there. So it gives us proof that the route is going to load if we tried it in a browser. And that is a lot of confidence to be given in, let's run the test and see how long it takes to run. Oh, it actually failed. Received a 500.
2 seconds.
There we go. Look, have we got a problem with our? I think that's with the enum casting.
Okay, that is most likely because the model has changed. We will need to try again.
Let's see.
Nope, still failing.
Can we? Let's have a quick. Weird. I wonder if we can just set that to the string example for a moment.
We can. If you could just say value.
Oh yeah, of course.
There you go. Ooh.
What if we?
Okay, so maybe in the model we should just we
Yeah.
we set that to us. We can just remove that part, can't we?
I wonder why though. That's strange.
Yeah,
This is running Laravel 9, right?
yeah. I don't think it's been updated in a couple of weeks though, but it shouldn't make a difference.
Anyhow, you can see our test passes.
Yep.
Here's the description of the test.
After deleting the
And
bits breaking
yeah,
it.
in 0.2 seconds, we are able to prove that the view share page actually loads. So imagine being able to turn around to your boss at work and in 0.2 seconds be able to say, I've made some changes to the view share page. It still works. It'll take you longer to say that sentence. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Like you actually feel like you could go in and start changing things and still be happy at the end of the day. Like you could ship
like you
on
can
a
ship
Friday.
on a Friday. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
When do we get a chance to do that anymore, right?
Exactly, and that's the power of tests. So that's why I always write tests now, because just that feeling of going home at the end of the week and not being stressed that code is broken and people are losing money is beyond any other cost that it would
nervously
take to
checking your phone to see if you got a message from the boss saying the site's down.
Exactly, that's the last thing you want on your Saturday, isn't it?
Exactly.
So let me take a look in this show controller. We haven't actually opened it yet, but let's take a look at what it's actually doing. You can see that Steve's reached for single action controllers.
I did.
Very nice paradigm.
Very, very much inspired by your talk at Laracon. I used to not inject them using DI, and I used to just call it statically. But
yeah,
having watched your talk and a couple of talks, I leant more towards resolving it through the DI and just handling it, and it feels really nice.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And there are occasions in testing as well where, because you've used dependency injection, not so much in controllers, but in other places, because you've used dependency injection, you don't even have to boot the Laravel framework to run the test, which would qualify as a unit test. And in those cases, the tests will run in a ridiculously small amount of time. Like you can run, if you've written tests like that, you can run 500 tests in a matter of milliseconds, which is crazy.
You can, because all of these that are being bound are contracts or interfaces, you can mock the interface and not even boot Laravel at all.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Now, is it worth it for something like a controller? Probably not. Like I would say, just use the feature tests and the power that Laravel provides.
0.2 seconds. That's acceptable,
it's
right?
Still pretty good. It's still pretty good. I think you're going to get away with that.
Definitely.
I really like this, by the way, from 8.1 that you're using. Just setting them to read only, so that there's no way you're messing that up.
Yep.
Inside your controller. I really like that.
Thank you.
Anyhow, so you can see, you inject these different things, which we'll test separately in a few moments. But all we're actually doing is we're executing this code. That's exactly what our test is currently doing. We've executed this code here, and it has returned the view, and all this has worked, which means that we could be a bit more specific in our feature test. And the first thing I'd like to do is actually make sure that it's loading the expected view, if that makes sense. So in our case, the share model was example, right? The template was example. So we would expect that the view is pages.shares.example.
Yep.
So what we can do is we can actually chain onto this response here. We can assert that it's okay, but then we can also say assert view is. And again, this is a tool that Laravel provides for testing. And as soon as you get used to the methods, you'll know exactly what is available to you, and you'll end up, it'll be second nature to you, because Laravel is very good at naming things and allowing you to very quickly guess what things do.
Definitely. And as a route that's got dynamic template loading, it's a perfect test to run, because you know you're covered.
Yeah. This is it, because I mean, the other thing, and you could set this. This is actually going to fail because there isn't a blade view
Yeah,
called this. But if you were to set this to like foo, we would actually expect this to be foo, not example, right?
yeah.
So it's good to
But
have
if
that
you
in
remove that
in.
assert OK, will it still assert the view is, or will it die? Because
That's actually a good question. I guess it depends which one runs first. Yeah, it's going to
yeah,
die because it's a
yeah,
500 error, isn't it? So yeah. But if we go back to example and we run this again, you can see that this passes. It works correctly. Everything is okay. But now we've been just a little bit more specific, and we can be sure that the view is the actual one that we expect. So if some rookie programmer comes in a few weeks after you've finished this little feature and hard codes this, and then you run this test again, and usually you'd run these tests in continuous integration before any deployments or mergers happen. If you do that, you're immediately going to know, whoa, no, you did something wrong. Something's gone bad with the code you've just written. You need to go and fix it before we can merge it in. Oh, I'm an idiot. I forgot. I hard coded that for a moment, and I'll go change it. Run the
we've all
tests
been
again, and
there.
we
We've all
have.
been
It's
there.
easy. It is easy to do. It is easy to
I'm
do.
pretty sure I did it a few weeks ago.
Well, when you're debugging, it's so useful to change things to be hard coded,
Yeah,
um, and it's very easy to not look at what you're committing to Git,
yep,
commit it, it's merged, and the next thing you know, everyone's in GBP rather than euros because you've
yep.
hard coded GBP somewhere.
I always trip myself up by leaving a stray DD lying around somewhere.
Yeah.
Always. It's like push it up to GitHub, the actions run. It's like, why are they failing? They're not failing Oh wait, no, they are failing locally. Why are they failing locally? Oh, there's a DD. Damn
And just to show that, by
it.
the way,
Yeah.
the test will catch that. If we put a DD here and run the test we've just created again, you'll see obviously the test won't mark as succeeded because it never finished. So you can see the exit code is 1 here, which is actually a failure code.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's super useful, and we can catch anything like that, which is really nice. Now we actually take this another step further because you'll see that we're passing this view all of this data here. So we're passing it the actual share object itself, and then we're performing these queries. Now, we don't really want to test these queries at this level. We probably want to test these queries a little lower level, but we could check that the share object is the model that we passed here, and we could at least check that these exist, right?
Yeah.
That would be nice. That
That's
would
a
give
good
us some more
solid
confidence.
test, I'd say. It's got good
Yeah,
coverage.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think for me that's what I've always found useful in testing is as much coverage as I can get. All the different variations and options.
Exactly. And that's just going to give you that little more assurance that everything is as you'd expect. So in this case, we can use the assert view has method, and we
Yep.
can say, look, I want to make sure that the share property that has been passed to the view is this share model that we used in our arrange step. And again, let's run that test, and you can see it passes, which means that that is indeed the case. Now what we can do is chain another method on, which is again assert view has. And what we can do here is rather than passing a key and a value, we can just pass an array of keys that we want to make sure exist. So I'm going to say, make sure the profile exists. Make sure that, was it experiences and owner and qualifications. Okay. And
Assert Luke
what we're
can
saying
spell.
here is one of my few qualifications is being able to spell. But you can see here we're not actually checking the values. We're just saying make sure these keys exist for the view.
Yep.
And if we run this test again,
We're good.
Yeah, we're good. 187 milliseconds. So let's just again review what we've proved here. In 187 milliseconds, you can prove to anybody who asks, and for all time, that when we ask for the view share root, Not only is the response okay, meaning that it will load in a browser, it also loads the correct view. It also passes the share object, and the view also has access to all of these different array keys, these data points. That is a lot to be able to prove in
Yeah.
100 and so milliseconds.
If I could have had this level of confidence when I was learning,
Yeah,
I would have
absolutely.
learned
Yeah,
so much quicker.
that's the thing. I think that's the thing.
Yeah,
Like, you feel like you can try new things out
yeah,
because you're not scared they're going to break what you've created.
definitely. And that's what,
um,
11 lines of code, and you've got a lot of confidence. If this was a new feature, being able to view a share of a CV that had been built and added, so much confidence in what you're about to ship, you don't have to worry about anything anymore, do you?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, another thing here is we've obviously like been explaining what we've been writing very clearly and taking the time
Yeah,
to show exactly what's going on. But in actual fact, if you knew what you were doing, this would take you a minute or so to write.
yeah,
Um, so in a minute, you then have proof forever that this works as intended.
yeah,
Now, you can keep this as a separated block, which is absolutely fine, but you can actually just chain straight onto this get, obviously, if you prefer. So if you want, you can actually make this look a little bit like this and get rid of this temporary variable here. And your test can be as simple as that. Now, again, some people prefer to have the specificity of arrange, act, assert.
yeah,
But I really like how this reads. I think it's very simple, and it's kind of like reading a little English sentence.
yeah.
Get the root view share, assert that it's okay, assert that it has that it is this, assert that it has this, and that it has these properties as well.
Yeah. I mean, what you could do from that, you could also sum it up. You could, put a block up the top, and you could say, take that user story. As a user, I must be able to view the view share page and it load correctly. You've just proven a user story if you got something like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could go one step further if you wanted, and you could change this for test instead of it, and you could literally paste that user story description in there.
Yeah.
And then when you run this test, you're actually going to get your entire user story. Now, there are tools out there that allow you to export these test names and their pass status. And so imagine that you have, I don't know, 1,000 tests, right? And you have all of your user stories as the descriptions for your feature tests.
Yeah.
And you use one of these tools to extract these test names. And you literally you could print it off on a printer and hand your boss a piece of paper that gives him all of the user stories that pass. It's almost like a feature description list for your application.
All of these
really
user
nice.
stories pass. Here you go. And your product owner, project manager, your whoever's in charge of monitoring acceptance criteria, if you could give them all of that, so much confidence, they're gonna start leaving you alone more just to get on with your job, right? Because we've all been there. We've all had that project manager going, "Have you built this yet? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. How do you know it works?" It's like, well, here's how it works. Back in the day, you used to have to, okay, I load it up and look, click, click, click. But what about this? Click, click, click. Okay. Now you can do that automated, and it's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. And you can also hand that if you're let's say freelance or you're a web agency, for example, you could hand that list to the client. You could say, here are all the things your application does. And it can just be a growing list. And they basically look down the list to say, yeah, we're happy with that. And you're good to go. You bill and you take the money home.
Exactly.
So
that's what it's about.
Yeah, we've actually done that. I've done that before in previous jobs where the tests literally were proof to the client that we'd done what they'd asked. So yeah, really powerful. Anyhow,
yes.
Back to testing.
Yes, testing.
So jump back into the show controller. I want to now take a look at these dependencies.
Okay.
So what's actually happening here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but these are basically just contracts that have real implementations. Those implementations are using Eloquent to grab items from the database.
Yep.
And then obviously, once they've done that, you are passing the items that you've provided to the view.
Yeah.
So what we can actually do is we can test this class or the implementation of this contract independently. And this would fall under the description of a unit test, usually. But we're going to be hitting the database still because we use Eloquent inside these classes. So in order to allow us to do that, I'm still going to place it under the feature directory, which will allow us to make use of Eloquent, and it will have a database behind it. And there are people that say that you shouldn't do this and that you should have used something like the repository pattern to mock out all your databases. To those people, I say you have too much time on your hands or you're not actually a programmer. So, yeah.
The important thing is you're writing tests. It doesn't matter where you're putting those tests. You're making that effort to write that test. You put it in the wrong directory. We've all done that with our music collection or photo album. It's the same concept. It is still there. Yeah, it might break some golden rule of programming that was written 20 years ago, but we don't care as much anymore, do we?
Well, exactly, and there are plenty of legitimate uses for unit tests. Like most of the custom classes that do low-level stuff in your application, go ahead and unit test. You don't need the Laravel application for those low-level classes, but you shouldn't waste time trying to mock out and return plain arrays or plain objects for all your models when there's something as powerful as Eloquent there for you to use and get up and running very quickly.
Definitely.
So. My 2 cents on that issue. But anyway, so we want to do the same thing. I'm going to put it inside the feature directory. And in this case, why don't we create a subdirectory called domains, because that's where this sits. Just working a little bit behind here.
A little bit of lag.
But
Wales to
Tupel's doing very
Derbyshire.
well. Exactly, yeah.
Tupel's doing amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, really, really nice. And don't they have Aaron coming on board at Tuple?
Yeah.
Is that Tuple?
Yeah. Aaron's coming on board soon. Aaron Francis. You probably know him from Sidecar, Laravel Sidecar. Anyone tuning in who's not sure who he is? He's in Laravel Sidecar. He does podcasts. He made what's Torchlight.dev, I believe. That's the code syntax highlighting for websites. It is amazing. It uses a VS Code engine in the background. Ooh.
Yeah, he's a very talented guy. I'm going to do this one because this one's actually a little bit more exciting. So take a look at this one. Let's just go through
my mouse back 2 seconds. There we go.
You should do that.
You carry on. Right. Can I change?
I think is that to me, Nino? If that's to me, I am currently on medium. I might even jump to low, but that's a fuzzy experience. It's like I've not got my glasses on.
I think I've got my webcam resolution as high.
I don't think it's you, to be fair. If it's anything to do with bad internet, it's likely me. But it seems to be behaving now anyway. So, and it's far better than when we tried to do this last time with the code with me in PHP Storm. So anyhow,
we actually tried code with me before, didn't we? And it was awful.
Yeah, we had serious problems.
Yeah, definitely. George had a good question actually in the chat. So how do people draw a line between a good level of coverage and not having too many test assertions for every scenario that you can think of? For example, I want to assert for more than just a 200 response, but not having to write tests for every possible data structure.
Yep. I would very much say this depends on when you write your tests. If you write your tests as you code, you tend to cover the scenarios anyway. because you're thinking about the edge cases that could come up as you're coding. If you're coding after the fact, I would say always go outside in. Write a feature test that covers the main points, like as we've just done in our show controller test, because that will prove immediately that nothing is going to throw a 500 error. That's the most important thing, right? Like if there's a word misspelled on the page, we aren't that bothered. That's not going to cost us money. If there's a 500 error and the site's down, that will cost us money. So that feature test is like I say, the most bang for the buck. It will help you. And then you basically think, well, you go down from there. You think, what is the next thing that will cost me money if this goes wrong, or that will cost the business money if this goes wrong?
And
that
it's not always just a sense of financial money. Sometimes it's that brand damage that costs money. It's affecting the brand. It's affecting the reliability and the trust that users put into that brand.
Yep. And stress as well, stress levels. Yeah. Right? What's going to cause me the most stress if this goes wrong?
Definitely.
Or what's going to cause the most stress to my friend when or my colleague when they're developing and this goes wrong. And in this case, you might say, well, the only thing I need to test on. Sorry,
that's me. I'm trying to respond in the chat while you carry on. Give me my mouse back in a minute. You talk.
Sorry, I was just going to say, like, in this case, for the test we've written in the show controller test, you might say, well, the only thing I need to check is that it loads okay. So assert okay is fine. But then you might think, well, actually, it's going to be a headache if it loads the wrong view down the line. So I'll check that as well. Yeah. It's going to be a headache if it loads, if I hard code the share model and it loads the wrong share model in. So I'll check that. And that is just down to perhaps experience, I'd say, as to what is going to cause me a headache? What do I actually want to test for now rather than have to debug later?
But then you start to add more on as you hit into these issues. Oh, Datadog's got reported this issue, or Bugsnag, or whatever you use for your error reporting, or maybe you're testing your code manually as well after you've written it, and okay, I forgot to add that variable. Add it in. Add a test for that so that I don't have to.
Yep, and that's down to you as a developer. Like when you get a bug report through. If you've got to patch that bug and ship it immediately, fine, do that. But make sure you put it on yourself to go back and write a test that proves that it's fixed.
Yeah. Always write a test to prove that what you have done actually fixes that problem, right?
Yeah. And I actually find the best way to do that is to undo the fix and then write a test that I know will fail. And then add code until that test no longer fails. Which is actually there's a term for that. That's test-driven development.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's because then you can be sure that your test is actually testing the right thing, and you've not mistakenly tested something else that always worked.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyhow, if we come back to share experiences query test, so in order to make everyone happy, let's go for declare strict types.
Thank you very much. Did you see Brent's recent video on YouTube about wanting PHP to be stricter? And I think then he started a Twitter thread about it as well.
I didn't. I know that Brent is very strict in that way by nature, and I do appreciate that about him.
Definitely, I'm very much in that as strict as possible camp. I've been looking for ways you could make it even stricter, but declaring strict types is enough for now, I suppose.
Yeah. And perhaps static analysis on top of that just gives you the extra level of confidence.
Laravel so in this case, level 9 is amazing. You get so much confidence. Not only is your test suite just there, covering all of the different aspects, but you know that you're never going to accidentally pass an int instead of a bool, or a string instead of a user object, or
Yeah. And it doesn't take that much time to write either. It's not like it's taking up tons of your life, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely worth checking out Laravel. Right. 3 steps.
This is
We
the
have to
first time I've
fulfill.
heard of these steps actually: arrange, act, and assert. I like it.
Is it? This is
Yeah.
this is the mantra. This is the mantra. In fact, interestingly, someone recently released a Pest plugin that that allows you to write your tests using hard-coded functions for these 3 steps. So you
Nice.
would put your logic inside the functions, and it literally splits it up into 3 steps. So if you really want to enforce that, you can actually use that plugin for Pest, which is quite
Nice.
cool. Anyway, so what do we want to do in arrange? Well, we know we want to load these experiences based on the profile. So we'll actually need a version of this action, right? We'll need an instance of this action. Yeah. So why don't we say query action equals new share experiences query. And even though we could, for example, load this through the Laravel container because this is technically a feature test, I'm going to actually load it or create the object manually with the thought that this is a unit test on steroids. We're writing it in the style of a unit test, but simply because it hits the database, we're not going to make use of those features. So when I'm writing a unit test, I new up dependencies manually, and I manually insert dependencies that are in the constructor. Now, in this case, there is no constructor, so we don't have to inject any dependencies manually here. But what else do we need other than the query action in the arrange step? Well, we need a profile, right? Because we load experiences based on the given profile ID. So again, much like the share object, we can say profile equals profile, and where's my model?
The first one.
There we go. Profile factory create. Okay, simple as that. We have a profile model ready to go. Now, obviously, if we're going to load experiences based on a profile, we need some experiences in the database as well. Now, we don't actually need to save these to any form of variable because we'll automatically be retrieving them later via this share experiences query. But we do need to place some experiences in the database. So again, we'll use the exact same thing, which is experience factory. Now, again, don't think that you've got this for free. You do have to create these factories. Steve's created them ahead of time. But yeah, they're very easy to create, but you do need to create. Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the factory, there's this awesome method called count. And we can actually say, I don't want you to create a single experience model. I want you to create this many experience models. So why don't we go for like 5 models, for example?
You can actually pass the count into the factory method as well.
Yeah. So we could do like that, for example.
Yeah. Whichever one works for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whichever you prefer. And in this case, we want to say that the experiences belong to the profile that we created here. So you can say for profile. Now, if the relationship on experience is called profile, you could leave it at that and Laravel would infer all the rest. But I do believe that it's actually called owner. Yeah, so here, look, we have owner. Yeah, well, that's fine because it shows what we actually would need to do in this situation. Yeah. All we have to do is pass the actual name of that relationship. Okay, so for the profile object, the relationship name is owner. And then when we're done, we call create. Now, this is actually going to return a collection of experiences rather than a single experience. So that's really nice. So now we have a profile in the database. We have 5 experiences in the database, and those experiences are linked to this profile here. Now, in the act step, we actually want to call our query action, right? So we can say query action handle, and it expects a profile ID. So we'll say profile and then get key.
Yep.
Yeah, get key. And that's going to actually, perform the query for us. Now we'll want to receive the result of that handle method. So let's say experiences equals, and then we can go and make sure that it loaded those experiences correctly. Now, unlike our feature test that we did before for the show controller, there is no special test object here. This is just a collection of experience models if everything went to plan, right? So what we have to do is lean on the testing framework, in this case Pest, to help us with this step. And all testing frameworks that are worth their salt ship with some form of assertion or expectation API. So in PHP unit, you have the assertion methods that are available to you in the test case. In Jest for JavaScript, you have their expectation API, and in Pest, you have its expectation API. Now, I really like expectation APIs because I think they read very nicely, and it
beautiful.
becomes it's immediately obvious what you're actually testing for. And I will hopefully show just how powerful that expectation API is in just a few moments. But we start an expectation chain by calling the global expect function. And we pass that the object that we're interested in checking. Okay, so you can picture this like placing something under the microscope. You're literally saying, I'm going to make sure that whatever I pass to expect fulfills a certain set of criteria. So we'll pass in, obviously, that experiences collection that we've received from the share experiences query object. And what we're going to do, first of all, is a very simple expectation method called toHaveCount. Okay, so we can literally say toHaveCount and pass the number of items we'd expect it to have. And because we've created 5 experiences linked to the profile, well, obviously, we'd expect that experiences has a count of 5. If we run this test, I am hoping that it passes, and it does. Yeah, absolutely.
So I usually, my first one in this case is usually to be an instance of collection.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, you can do that. So that would be to be instance of, and this is good.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, Steve. That this could be, if you just use toHaveCount, it could be an array.
Yeah.
Or it could be any iterable. It could be a. That's really bad. I forgot the name of it.
A list,
yield,
an array,
which would be a generator. It could be a generator. So you definitely want to check. Now you can do it this way. So here's one way to do it: to be instance of collection class. But if you're using the Laravel plugin for Pest, which I imagine you are here,
I believe I am.
You can just do to be collection.
Now tell me if I am using the plugin.
You are indeed using the plugin.
Usually, any project, it's like in my keyboard memory. It's like, because I use Warp. If I come here and I go, okay, so composer require. Well, there's Nuno.
Yeah.
Pest is always in there. So it's always in there, so I can just tap up because I'm using that sort of terminal. It's like Pest, tap up, which plugins do I want? It's up, okay, last one, up, and again. So much easier.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I would definitely recommend installing the Laravel plugin as well for Pest if you're using Laravel, because little things like this, to be collection, and earlier in the show controller test, where we call just this get function, that is available because of the Laravel Pest plugin. So definitely worth installing. It's just another composer dependency that you add to your dev dependencies, and then you can forget about it and use all of the features it adds. Okay, so already we have kind of inferred a little bit that this is correct. Like, although it doesn't prove perfectly that this experiences object is exact, it's sort of inferred through logic that given this setup, these experiences are indeed the experiences that we created up here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take much to make this a little more specific. Wouldn't it be nice if we could loop through each of these experiences, check that it actually is an experience object, and once we've checked that it's an experience object, make sure that if we take a look at this share experiences query, make sure that it eager loaded the job title and company fields. Yeah. That would be really nice.
Right? That would icing on the cake for that sort of test, right?
Exactly, yeah. And eager loads are one of those things that you do want to kind of test for, because it can be a huge performance impact on your application if they're not there. So always nice to add those tests. So what we can do is we can carry on chaining onto this expectation, and we're going to reach for a new method called each. Now, each is a lovely little expectation API method that allows us to iterate over every item in an iterable expectation object. So we've passed, obviously, experiences, which is a collection, which is iterable, which means we can use the each function here. And this accepts a closure. So I'm going to use shorthand closures. And we're going to receive a single experience. Now, this experience isn't actually the underlying experience object. It's the underlying experience object wrapped in another expectation. If that makes, now I want to make sure that makes sense, because that might be confusing. But yeah, this isn't an experience, so you wouldn't
type hint it there, would you?
Exactly, you wouldn't type it as experience. If you wanted to type into it, you'd actually type into it as an expectation, right? But in this case, I'm not going to type into it. I'm just going to leave it as experience like that.
You're going to turn in my grave tonight.
You can go ahead and add that when I'm gone. But yeah, if I drop down, hopefully onto a new line, there we go. It's just taking a sweet moment. I can then begin a new expectation chain on every item in this experiences collection. So what I'm going to say is, expect it to be an instance of, okay, so we reached for this before we refactored to be collection. Expect it to be an instance of the experience model. Just trying to alter that.
There we go.
Yeah. You fix that for me? Sorry, I'm just allowing it to catch up again. Okay, so before we go any further, let's actually run this test. Let's see if it works. And you can see it still works, which means that everything was going okay.
Yeah.
Now, you may be thinking, well, how do we know that are you sure that works? Is that actually running? I can prove this. Let's change this to something else. Let's say it should be profile, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And if we run this test again, you'll see, hopefully, that it fails. Yeah, and it's failing with this message. The object wasn't a profile because obviously it was an experience. So yes, it's working. It loops over each item in that iterable and makes sure that it is an experience object. Now, how would we actually test that the relations were loaded? Well, a model actually has a method on it called relation load. It's a Boolean that says whether or not a relation has been loaded or not. So that would indicate whether or not it worked, basically. So in the expectation API, we can actually call methods on the underlying object and access properties on the underlying object as though we actually had an instance of that object ourselves. So even though this is an expectation object, we can still access that relation loaded method on the underlying experience model. I hope that makes sense. But basically what I'm trying to say is relation loaded isn't a method on the expectation API. It's a method on the experience model. So how I expect to work, we're actually able to just call this as though it were on the expectation API. And it's going to create us a new expectation object based on the result that's returned to us from this method here.
Yeah.
So what we can say is expect that returns a value of true, right? And if we run this again, there we go. Yeah, you can see it still passes, and that's working correctly, which is really nice. Now, the other one that we had in here, I do believe, is company. It also should eager load company. So we don't have to start the expectation chain again, because what happens is once you've delved into an object and you've performed one or more expectation methods on it, you are then returned to the top level of that object. So what I can actually do here is I can call the relation loaded again, but this time pass company, right? And again, I can just call to be true. And if we go ahead and run this again, you'll see that it still passes. So this is kind of the power of the expectation
Yeah.
API. You can really perform these complex expectations in a very simple, logical way. And it just makes it very easy to test those edge cases. Very easy to test those edge cases.
And it looks really nice and fluent while you're doing it, right?
It, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, really nice. And whereas we might have to have in say PHP unit have broken this out into lots of different lines of
Yeah.
assertions, we can just do this in one fluent chain here. The other thing is that it checks that it's part of the profile. So let's use our knowledge to do this as well. So why don't we access the profile object, or is it owner? Actually, it's owner, isn't it?
Yeah, it'll be the owner.
We'll access the owner object, and we'll check that the owner object is the profile that we have up here, right? So you've actually delved down twice, right? Because is actually a method on a model, isn't it? Is we can use is on a model to check that a model is equal to another model, if that makes sense. But obviously, this is not an expectation. This is going to return a Boolean. So to turn it into an expectation, we then just chain to be true again. And we have ourselves a really solid test.
Yeah.
Run that again. It still passes. So
This
I'm just
definitely
going
feels like a
for two.
masterclass in how to test.
Well, if that's the case, then that's good. I've achieved
Yeah.
something. But yeah, let me just break down this expectation again because it's quite complicated. But I wanted to just show off what's possible once you get used to the expectation API and the power it offers. We start with the expect method. You can pass anything you want to that expect method, any object, any result, anything that comes back from calling a method, you can pass into expect. Once you've got there, you can call any number of expectation methods. So if you just jump back to your browser, Steve, I do believe you had the Pest documentation.
Yep.
And if we just jump into the Pest docs themselves and over to expectation, you can just scroll down a little and available expectations, and you'll see there's the list of all the expectation methods you could possibly call on the expect API.
Yeah.
So there's literally an expectation method there for every possible scenario. If you think of it, you can test it using the expectation API.
And if it's not there, you can extend Pest and add it yourself.
Exactly, yeah. And those custom expectations, like absolutely, those custom expectations tend to just be like
specific, right?
a combination, a combination of these lower level expectations, basically. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so back to the editor.
We are there. So there's probably a little bit of lag in between us, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm just going to switch back to Safari while that catches up because I can see things in real time in my browser. So once we've checked that, we call to be collection. Now, to be collection, as I said, is part of the Pest plugin. A Pest plugin can add as many of these custom expectation methods as it wants, and you can add as many custom expectation methods as you want for your personal checks that you want to do for application-specific things. Once we've done that, we can chain additional expectation methods because all expectations basically return the expectation instance back, which means obviously you can add more methods. So in this case, we say, once we know it's a collection, we also want to check it has 5 items. Then we get a bit more complex by jumping into each, and we basically say for every item in this iterable, perform the following expectations. And in this case, we're saying make sure that the experience is actually an experience model, has eager loaded the job title, has eager loaded the company, and that the owner is in fact the profile that we created in the arrange step of the test. And if you kind of have that power in mind, you can more or less test anything with expectations in Laravel or in any PHP project, which is really nice.
It's so nice to see how simple that level of testing can be done. And yeah. I've written lots of tests, but even if I hadn't, looking at this test is very it explains it very well. It's very readable,
Yeah.
and that's one thing that I found really put me off when I was learning and I was trying to get into PHP unit was that you know it felt scary. All these big classes with assertions here, and the documentation was a bit older, wasn't as good. It wasn't readable. Like I didn't understand what my tests were actually checking.
Mm.
So to
Yeah,
see something
absolutely.
this clean, this descriptive, is nice.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree. Um, Now, Chathora
Yep.
has just put in a very good point in the chat. He said, experience for other profiles should not be in the result. Can we test it? And you can actually test this very easily, literally by adding a couple of lines. So if we take a look at the experience factory, you'll see that if we do not provide a profile ID, it will generate a new profile. Okay, so that is super handy because that means we don't have to worry about that in our tests. So if we jump back into our test, after performing this step here, why don't we add another factory or another model creation for experiences that don't belong to
Yeah.
this owner here? So what we can say is experience factory. And I don't want to hit the database too hard. Database queries still take time. It's not like tests are magically taking the database query time away from us. So the more models we create in our test, the longer our tests take to run. So in this case, I'm just going to create, say, 2 different models, which will be 2 different profiles. And I will create those there. So what this is going to do is it's going to create 2 new profiles, 2 new experiences linked to those 2 profiles. And that is basically going to ensure that if we have a count of 7, we have something wrong, okay? So you can imagine if this, in fact, I can show you. Let's run this test to make sure it passes. It should pass. Yeah, so here we can see the test is passing. Let's jump back into our share experiences query. And again, imagine somewhere down the line, we have a little faux pas and we comment out this line here. In other words, it's no longer
Yep.
limiting our query to that profile. Now, when we run our test again, it's going to fail because it's going to say that it tried to load 7 models instead of 5. And that will prove that it's actually loading incorrectly. It's loading
Yep.
other people's experience in. All we have to do is uncomment the line that we added, or if we'd never added that line, which is why test-driven development is useful because we already provide the assumptions before we write the code. We can add the line in, we run our test again, it passes, and we know we're good to go. So you can, if you want, split this into you could split this section here into a separate test. You can have as many of these tests or these test functions as you want in a single test file. So just because we've only done one test per file at the moment, that doesn't mean to say you would do that in reality. In fact, most test files would have multiple test functions in them. So you can basically split this out however you choose to prove it. But that is how I would go about proving such a question. Just create some random experiences and make sure they're not loaded in this case. All right.
Nice.
Just taking a look through the comments. Yeah, I hope, Shamar, that you have been encouraged to use the expectation API. It is great.
I remember when you announced the expectation API, and you know when Pest first came out, and when I actually started liking Pest, I was like, this is fantastic. How could testing be any better? Then you came out with the expectation API, and it was just like mind blown instantly. Like you've just made this really nice and easy to write test even easier. How the hell do you do that? So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely, I 100% recommend using the expectations API for using Pest. Um, it makes your tests readable, and it makes them just understandable, readable, and beautiful to look at.
And enjoyable to write,
And
which is
yeah,
important.
so enjoyable to write.
Um, I think one of the cool things that I saw recently on Twitter is obviously the original expectation API was based on Jest, which is JavaScript's testing framework, like one of the most popular JavaScript testing frameworks. And the expectation API was based on Jest's expectation API. But obviously, we've since added a lot of stuff to the expectation API to the point where I saw on Twitter recently that someone had created Pest's expectation API in JavaScript because it was that powerful and nice to use.
Yeah.
So you really do have state of the art tooling with the expectation API in Pest, and it's well worth getting used to and finding the superpowers of it because there really are lots of superpowers.
I'm assuming that's
able
what
to
the
use.
new BDD style plugin for Pest is doing. It's extending the expectation API.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually. I don't know whether you remember. I did a talk a
The
while
DSL
back.
stuff, wasn't it?
The DSL stuff, and this is touching on that because you don't actually call the it or test functions. You call a brand new function that wraps the it and test functions.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool that people are kind of experimenting with that, and I can't wait to see how that moves on and evolves as Pest kind of grows. So it's super cool to see. Just looking through, I think I don't want to like write any more code. I feel like we've kind of explored at least the basics of kind of the levels of tests and why you'd want to write tests, and hopefully
Definitely.
I've inspired enough people to check out Pest and things.
Yeah. And even if you don't check out Pest, which you're an amateur if you don't use Pest, right? If you don't want to check out Pest, just as long as you take away that testing can be easy and enjoyable, and it gives you so much confidence in what you're doing. And confidence is always best when paired with beauty. So Pest PHP is where you go.
Absolutely.
Simple as.
One more comment that I've just seen in the chat from Michael. He can't get his head around TDD. He just wants to use Artisan to make models, controllers, tests.
Yeah.
And absolutely, I agree with you. I do that myself. So if you're following TDD to its strictest form, you wouldn't create any class or model or anything until you'd got your first test in place. I think that actually, when you've got something as powerful as Artisan's make commands, that actually slows you down.
Yeah.
I actually go for a slight hybrid, which is I create the base classes, the models, the things that I know I will need, and then I start writing my tests. So yeah, not the strictest of TDD. Robert Martin would probably tut at me and say that I'm not a proper developer, but I think that there has to be a line somewhere between expedience and obviously actually making sure that your tests are doing what you expect them to do.
I completely agree on that one as well. I mean, you can do the red-green refactor life cycle, but it doesn't mean you have to start on red. You can build up those base tests, right? Those build your classes so that one, your IDE is not going to complain at you, and two, you can actually start writing your tests properly based off of a class you've got. And then you can start going, okay, call this method. Method doesn't exist. Okay, now I can start the strict TDD red-green refactor. But starting from the very beginning of red to green refactor, well, does that mean you're going to start writing tests before you've installed Laravel? If you really want to be pedantic about it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And there are developers who would be like, yeah, you should definitely you should have a test in place straight away. But you got to find what's good for yourself, and I think it's a nice balance. And one little tip here as well, which I think Michael alluded to anyway, is that a lot of the make commands from Artisan have either the -- test option or the -- pest option, and that will automatically generate a test with the same folder structure as the class itself. So all of that manual directory creation that we were doing earlier, you can do that in a matter of seconds with Artisan, which is really nice.
Yes, and I remember you did that commit yourself.
Yeah, I must have got
you added that one.
To do, manual directory creation. I was like, there must be a better way.
And there is,
So
you've
yeah,
created it, and it's amazing. It's just remembering it, right? You just got to remember that bit that you can add it,
yeah,
and as soon as you get into that habit, you're fine. And if you start creating a
yeah,
test each time you create a class, and if you're into that habit, you're going to force yourself to write tests. So you're going to be in
yeah,
that right
definitely.
mindset. It's going to become part of your workflow to write that test.
Yeah, and it's not. There's no problem as well with forgetting that in the early days. Like, just remember to try writing tests as much as possible, and uh, and then the rest does come. It always comes eventually, and you kind of start realizing. And you originally everything's a feature test because that's the easiest way, and you don't want to
Yep.
mess around with things. And then you start thinking, right, okay, I want to try out unit tests because I think that I've seen that they're a bit faster. And then you're like, well, what are these model factories? How do I make the most use of those? And what's all the amazing things I can do with the expectation API? But it all starts with the first. I need to write a test.
Yeah.
So just get started and jump in and make loads of mistakes.
Work from the outside in. Even if your first and only test is assert OK on a route loading, you're on the journey. The next time you write a test, you'll do assert OK and assert view has or assert view is. You'll start getting closer and closer to bigger coverage because you're going to get into that habit. You're going to find it easier the next time you come to it. And I think that's the main
Exactly.
thing you got to bear in mind is that you're not going to hit this level of testing straight away. You're not going to remember it straight away. You're like, oh, what do I do? What do I need to do? It's a mindset change that you got to ease yourself into, and don't feel bad if you
Yeah.
don't get it straight away, because none of us did. Take your time, slowly get towards it, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something I talked about in my I did a presentation with for Buddy recently, and something I talked about with that is there is a the first application I ever created with tests in mind, um, and when I look back at that test suite now, I cry at places because it's horrible. It's horrible, but it's the only application that I wrote from that period of my career as a developer that still exists and runs. Every other project has either had to be rewritten from the ground up or no longer exists, and the company no longer exists, probably because of my bad code.
Because the test
So,
suite wasn't
like,
working.
exactly, yeah. Well, there's no. The only thing that saved that project is the fact that there are tests there,
Yeah.
and they prove that it still works, even though those tests are horrible and don't make use of database factories and are completely outdated and are structured wrong. They exist, and that proves it works. So
And it still works,
just go
and the
right
tests
to
prove it. The tests outlive the
exactly,
code.
definitely, absolutely, and I'm pretty proud of that fact. Even though, like I say, there are lots of things I would change if I redid it today, but
Yeah.
that's true for every new learning thing. I'm sure there's code that we all wish we could change from something that we wrote 2 months ago. So, you know,
Yeah, definitely. But what I like to do personally is I like to look back at that code to see how far I've come, instead of always looking online and seeing people like yourself writing tests like this with ease. Instead of looking at that and saying, I'm never going to be able to do that. Look at something you used to do and look at where you are before you look forward. Look at how far
yeah,
you've come before you look at how far you want to go, because otherwise you're going to get imposter syndrome. You're just going to give up. You'll be defeated, and you won't want to do this sort of stuff because you're not going to be in the mindset that you can do it. Even though you've
yeah,
got all of the
very much.
tools available to you, all there for you, really easy to write. If your mindset isn't there, you're never going to get there yourself. So
Mm,
make sure you look back at how far you've come if you're feeling a little bit unsure.
yeah, and the landscape for testing in PHP and Laravel has never been greater either. Um, like when I first was jumping into testing with Laravel and PHP, I think Jeffrey Way had a couple of courses on testing on Laracasts. But other than that, it was a bit of a barren landscape, and you were guessing a lot of things. Um, class-based model factories didn't exist in Laravel.
No.
They had tooling for it, but it wasn't very nice. It wasn't as fluent as it is today. It was a bit of a hassle, and there was a lot of things where you just had to kind of guess or work it out. And
Yeah.
there are so many tutorials online since Pest has been created. There's tons and tons of content about Pest being made all the time. There's you've got yourself. There are some stuff on Laracast about it with more potentially on the way in the near
Yeah.
future there. There's Pest in Practice series by myself if you want to see me do some silly stuff. And there's so much stuff that you can now look at and
Code Course
get
is
an
another
idea of.
good one who've just released a getting started with Pest course. So definitely
Completely
go
free
check
as
that
well,
one out.
right?
I believe it is. Recently added, up and running with Pest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's
There
free.
you go. Like 4 hours
Yeah,
of course there, right? 4 hours 19 minutes of pure test learning.
yeah,
So much stuff just to get you up and running now, and there's never been a better time to start testing if you've yet to make that jump.
yeah. 100% agree. 100%. And there's lots of open source repos with examples of testing as well. I mean, if you're really stuck at what to test, just go to I don't know, let's go to Sparsy. Ask me to do that later, please. Thank you. Let's go to their repositories, find one of their websites or find something by Sparsy, see if they've updated the tests. They have, so you can come through and you can go, okay, so what are they doing? You can look at other people's code and understand it, and it can show a release note of the product. So, okay, it's using a factory, then it's going to get a certain successful and a certain see something. There's loads of content out there. Is the point we're trying to get at? Is don't beat yourself up. Cheer yourself up and see what's out there to help you. And there's the community on its own is so supportive. 100% supportive.
Yeah, and I mean, thanks to you as well for kind of putting all this stuff together to help people who want to learn these new things.
I really struggled when I got into PHP and into Laravel, into testing, because when I was getting into testing, the only thing I could do is look through the PHP unit docs, and that almost put me off completely. It was like one of those auto-generated ones based off of like the methods and the class names. Auto-generated docs are never great. It just completely put me off. I was like, I don't get it. What is it talking about? So
this is
we've
done
place.
The hard work for you. Yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of people who have very much struggled picking testing up, and then decided it was a bad experience, and kind of tried to improve. And now there's so many different resources available that you kind of overwhelmed for choice in a way. But yeah.
Definitely. Well, awesome. I mean, thanks for coming, Luke. That was amazing.
No, it's a pleasure. It's nice to come on a stream again. It's always an enjoyable session.
You have had a bit of a break. Life can get busy. Secret Indeed. Projects, working as a mastermind with Nuno, working on Pest. It gets busy.
Yeah, and I mean there are some very exciting things in the pipeline for Pest as well. Pest V2's on the horizon, which will bring a bunch of new exciting features, which no doubt we can showcase when it's the time.
Definitely.
And there's some learning resources on Pest that are in the works as well, which will be very exciting for people wanting to dive into the world of testing in Laravel and PHP.
That'd be amazing. So what I'll do is I will write my next application. I won't write any tests, and I'll get you to do it next time.
It sounds like a plan.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming. Everyone watching, Luke's Twitter is in the description. Make sure you follow him. He's always tweeting out great snippets. His YouTube link is also in the description. Make sure you give him a subscription. He does Pest in Practice, which imagine this stream but on steroids and with a lot more detail and a lot more complicated applications going through that. Go give it a subscribe. Go watch some of the videos. You'll really see what you can do with Pest and testing in general. But thanks, Luke, and obviously thanks for Tuple for giving me a license so that we could do this easily. If this was code with me, I think we'd
Absolutely.
just be on the first test still. So winning.
Yeah. If I had better internet, I mean, we wouldn't have even had the problems we did have. So, but it's been
Exactly.
almost problem free, which is brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next stream. The poll has now finished. I will be doing the Lara Camp stream next, which is a base camp clone in Laravel, but I'm throwing some steroids in there and making it much more. It's going to be connecting to GitHub and syncing issues, and it's going to be what Basecamp could be if it was built with Laravel instead of Ruby on Rails. So there we go, because
Very nice.
PHP stands on Ruby. So thank you very much. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you like this content, if you want to see more of it, if what you liked about it, what you'd like to see more of. There's a Discord link in the description, so feel free to join and give me any feedback so that I can make the next stream even better for you. But thank you very much. Have a good evening and good night. Thank you.
Right.